Okay, good morning. So, Gemara Brochos, Perek Tes, chapter 9. Now, I believe you started the Mishnah yesterday, but we'll start again and we'll work through there. Okay, so on page 54a, those who are using Gemara, beginning of chapter 9. So a person, they see a place where miracles happen to the Jewish people. Now we'll discuss soon exactly who, what, when, where, various things. But he sees such a place. He'll say the following bracha, Baruch, etc. Well, that's also a question we'll discuss in a moment. She'asa nisim lavaseinu v'mokim hazeh. Blessed is Hashem who performed a miracle for our ancestors in this place. Just sign someone else in. Okay, so that's clause 1. Mokim shnekra meno boides kachavim. If he sees a place where idol worship has been uprooted, this is specifically in the land of Israel, he says the bracha, Baruch she'aka avodas kachavim artzeinu. Blessed are you, etc., who has uprooted idolatry from our land, meaning the land of Israel. Okay, so a few discussion points. First of all, good morning to those who just signed on. Where Gemara Brochos, chapter 9, the very beginning, just started the Mishnah again. So I believe you had a bit of a discussion last time or yesterday about whether we say in these blessings, because in the Mishnah it says Baruch, and then it says the words, She'asa nisim lavaseinu. Doesn't say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. So the question is, do we say Hashem's name and Malchus? So the conclusion of the Gemara centuries that we do for all brachas, it's an essential part of a bracha, and often the Mishnah or the Gemara just writes it in brief. But there is a view that that we don't, and the underlining premise of that is that these brachas are different, fundamentally different from all other brachas. Anyone that think or know why they're fundamentally different?
I think sometimes we just try to say thanks and not the whole blessing.
Okay.
Yeah, then we don't mention.
If we look at our morning blessings, for example, we thank Hashem that we can see and different things, although they also praise of Hashem, but they're also thanks. So it's good thinking. But Robert?
Yeah, it was also, I think Rabbi Smith said that we did not make a blessing over something we ate. We eat, so we do not necessarily need to do that.
Right, so it's not something that you have to do. Say.
Right, yeah.
Right. So that is what makes this fundamentally different. In other words, the other things that we're going to discuss, as soon we'll discuss if a person...
like if you have an esrog, a tzivui, something you were commanded to do, you have to acknowledge it, Elokeinu melech haolam.
Right, because that's a continuation of what you're saying. So the next clause is going to be about, thunder, lightning, and various things. So those things, once it happens, you have an obligation to praise Hashem. If you're going to eat, as we said, we have an obligation to say a blessing on the food before we eat. Over here, no one has an obligation to look at something or to see something. So that is the thought behind why we wouldn't need to see it, need to say Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. But of course, the conclusion is that we do, and that is in practice, You see a place, you make the blessing. Question is though, we said if you see a place where a miracle happened to Jewish people, so what is the definition of the Jewish people? So, any suggestions?
I said that there's a word missing there, that the Nisim are not done only for Avotenu, it's still Nisim that are being done in our days too. In Israel, in the wars, there is constantly Nisim that are done.
Correct. You know, particularly you look at the 6-day war, for an example.
Right.
I mean, before the war, I mean, all the wars, but you know, that's the prime example. Before the war,
The Yom Kippur War.
they're right, they didn't know if they're going to win. And if they were going to win, they were like measuring up all the sports fields, the cemeteries, you know, and to win in 6 days, with although the loss of every Jew is a tragedy, but you know, it seemingly went beyond the laws of nature. It was miraculous, but it's not an obvious miracle. It's not like the splitting of the Red Sea. So they're the type of miracles we're speaking about, where nature was transcended. Now, you could possibly argue that the 6-day war also transcended nature, and you know, and I would probably put that case forward, but it wasn't transcended in a way that no one can argue with it. The splitting of the Red Sea, anyone, you know, if that would happen today, no one could. I'm sure we'll find someone who'd argue it wasn't a miracle, but generally speaking, people couldn't argue. But there are many people today who say the 6-day war was just good military strategy, and you know, and various things. Now, yeah. Obviously, we see it's beyond that, but you know, the type of miracles speaking about are things that transcend nature. But that is a good point. You know, if there would be an open miracle today, or if people would recognize the other miracles, then quite possibly we'd say that blessing. The 6-day war also didn't happen, again, using the example, but obviously other wars, but didn't happen in a specific place that you can point, you know, tie it down to. Again, unlike the splitting of the sea.
It's not a specific place, maybe, but it's a specific people, the Jewish people.
Yes. So, but we can only say the blessing on a place where we recognize that this is the place. So the question is, what is the Jewish people? In other words, so I'll give an example. We speak about a certain type of korban chatas. So korban chatas, they translate it as a sin offering. Now, sin offering, you know, again, we obviously didn't come here to discuss Christian theology, God forbid, but unfortunately in the Western world, which has come by Christianity, the chatas, the sin offering, has been distorted. So we're just going to mention it briefly just to clarify the Jewish view, not to get confused with the Western worldview. So the Christians come and say that their fellow, so to speak, died for everyone's sins, right? That he was the epitome of the korban chatas, of the sin offering. Now it doesn't work that way, right? Because a chatas is not for something that was done on purpose. In other words, it's not really a sin per se. Again, sin is a Christian word in itself. A chatas is for an accident. Now we say an accident. In English, accident can mean two things. There's an accident that's beyond your control, and there's an accident with a small degree of negligence. So we're not speaking about an accident that's beyond your control. That's called an oines. So an accident's beyond your control. You know, there's a fellow, he's driving his car. All of a sudden, there's an earthquake, unexpected earthquake, throws the car in the air, and as he lands, he turns on the light switch on Shabbos, lands out. You know, right? That's oines, right? That's beyond his control. There's nothing he could do about that, right? A shogeg would be a person, let's say, he woke up in the morning and he forgot it was Shabbos. And he goes downstairs, he lights the gas stove, puts on the kettle, you know, God forbid he does this, and all of a sudden he's halfway through his coffee, the caffeine kicks in and he realizes
It's Shabbos.
Shabbos. So there's a degree of negligence because he forgot. If something's important enough to someone, they don't forget. You know, I'm sure that fellow who won the $1 billion lottery, although it seems he hasn't claimed it yet, so maybe not. But you know, if he would have that ticket under his pillow ready to collect the winnings the next morning, I'm sure if he got woken up suddenly at 2 o'clock in the morning, he's not going to forget that ticket's under his pillow. Right? If something is important enough to somebody, you don't forget. So there's a degree of negligence to a certain extent. But a shoygeg, this type of accident, is called a shoygeg, that if a person realized, they would never do it. If they would know, they would remember with Shabbos, they would never do it. But they made this mistake. So there's an individual chatas, right? An individual. So again, so the chatas is for the shoygeg. It's got nothing, no relation. I actually once on a school, non-Jewish school, went on a tour of a shul where I was, and you know, I don't remember if it was part of my discussion or was it in response to an answer to a question. And I mentioned about the chatas being for accidents, and the teacher in charge of the tour says, that's not what Judaism believes, right? So, you know, the priest is telling me what Judaism believes, but, you know, because they've twisted it to believe that it means something on purpose, and it's very important for us to realize that a shogeg is for a specific type of accident. So there's an individual, I gave an example, individual case, he forgot, he did something, that's a chatas. There's also communal chatas. So the classic example of communal chatas would be let's say the Sanhedrin mistakenly ruled, they had an error, and they ruled that something that is forbidden, they ruled it's permissible. It's permitted. And many people, based on this ruling, because, you know, Sanhedrin said it, so fine. They went out and ate that food, or they did this thing on Shabbos, or whatever it happens to be. And we have a kahal, right? Kahal, you know, colloquially it means like a congregation. You know, we might even call a synagogue group a kahal, but this is the definition we're going to speak about in a moment. If a kahal goes and does this thing that you're not meant to do, and then they realize, whoops, was a mistake. We weren't meant to permit this thing. It's actually forbidden. So the individuals don't bring a chatas because they follow the ruling of the Sanhedrin of the Supreme Court. It's the Sanhedrin who has to bring a chatas. So it's if the kahal does something. Now, what's the definition of kahal? So for this halacha, even if it's one tribe.
Kahal is usually a crowd.
Right. So I'm saying, like, today we use it as a you know, even like a congregation or something, or a gathering.
Yeah, a crowd.
But over here, for this halacha, for this chatas, kahal can mean, doesn't have to be the majority of the Jewish people, even with the majority of one tribe. In other words,
Can we call it a community?
No. So in this case, it has to be, in other words, it's a nation.
Okay.
So a nation, we're going to say that even one tribe is like a mini nation. They're a kahal. So there's when we set up in our Mishnah, that if we see a place that a miracle happens to Yisrael, to the Jewish people. So what's the definition of Jewish people? So we have we have dispute. One view is that we compare it to the chatas, this communal chatas, but even if it's one tribe or the majority of one tribe, that's already, so if a miracle happened just to the tribe of Ruvain, then any Jew who sees this place would have to say the blessing. Then we have another view that actually means the majority of the Jewish people. as from the majority of Jews. So that's one issue for discussion. Another issue is we say the blessing that the miracles that happened to our ancestors. So what's the definition of ancestor? Right. So let's say you have someone who converts. Is it biological ancestors that we have? And then what's also interesting is that the Gemara is going to bring a case, a brisa, where we speak about we had certain great tzaddikim in Bavel, that were thrown into a furnace of fire, and they were saved. And that's one of the places this brisa says that we say a bracha. We actually say more than one bracha. We'll discuss it when you get to there. But most of us are not biological descendants of these three people. Right. So I was saying also, ancestors over here is quite a liberal definition. By liberal, we don't mean in the
Political.
right, the theological right. So, but when we have the majority of the Jewish people like that, so then even if we happen to not be descendants or someone as a convert, the fact that the Jewish today, they're the ancestors, so to speak. When we have great tzaddikim, like the case of the fire, the cauldron, so we're all considered ancestors of tzaddikim to a certain extent. In other words, that we're the recipients, we're the students, or the students of the students. Right, so the influences on all of us. Okay, any questions, thoughts on that before we, yes, Rob.
Again, a couple of things floating in my mind. One was from a previous discussion with the rabbi, but again, if I understand correctly, when somebody converts to Judaism, we're prohibited from ever regarding them as not being Jewish. They
Correct.
are not, they're within, all right? And then in one of the discussions, the rabbi used the term kuti for somebody who was a convert, but you don't necessarily trust them or whatever the process is. So how do we then reconcile they being called ancestors if we have this, again, question marks over their heads?
Yeah, very good question. So the kuti, what we say is that their conversion, they weren't sincere in the first place. So let's give an example of the concept, and we'll go back to them in particular. So let's say you have today someone, converts, and they convince the based and they're very sincere, and they're going to keep kosher and Shabbos and all the various mitzvahs, and they convert on a Thursday, and that Shabbos they drive to the movies. So if it was 6 months later, and again, I'm not putting the limit of 6 months, I'm just using example much later, then we can say that they were very sincere at the time of their conversion. But like all of us, we have a Yetzer Hara, we have a evil inclination, for lack of better translation, and we can all succumb. No one should be overly confident in themselves, God forbid. So just like any other Jewish person can, God forbid, fall prey to the schemes of the Yetzer Hara, so can this person. But when it's the next day, that implies that they were lying, or they weren't being so truthful when they accepted the mitzvahs on themselves. And accepting the mitzvahs is one of the primary requirements for being a sincere convert. So what might happen in that case is they might revoke the conversion. Or not revoke it, but say, in other words, it was never good in the first place. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Sure.
So the kutim, what happened is we saw after time, see these people, so in English they're called the Samaritans, which again, we keep mentioning the Christians today, but the so-called story of the Good Samaritan. Just by the way, the whole point of that story is to insult Jews. Because the story goes, there was a Cohen, a Levi, and then the third guy helped. The Cohen wouldn't, the Levi wouldn't. The third one should have been a Yisrael if it was a normal story. But they put the Samaritans show, in other words, the Samaritans are good guys and the Jews are nasty, no good people, God forbid, right? So the whole expression of being a good Samaritan is actually an insult and a slap at Jews. So anyway, so what happened is that when the 10 tribes were taken out of Israel, but this was anyway, he conquered the whole region. The whole region was conquered in stages. It wasn't all by one person, but was conquered essentially by Ashur, Kingdom Ashur, which eventually became Babel. They conquered the whole region. The problem was, it wasn't like today, where you can put your army on airplanes and you can get them to another place reasonably quickly. Armies was difficult to maneuver them around the whole area. It could take months, and you could only travel in spring and summer. So if they were concerned, what if there's rebellion in one area? How are we going to be able to get the army there quick enough to put it down? And if you keep the army in one area, then what about all the other areas? Right? Everyone's going to rebel. So he came up with a plan. He figured that people rebel for one of two reasons. One, to get their land back. So what he did is he picked nations up and he put them on different lands. But number two, even if not their land, maybe their ethnic independence. So you might have, let's say, I don't know, you put a bunch of Zulus in New Zealand. So even though that's not the ancestral homeland, but they might want to have an independent Zulu state with Zulu language and customs. So not only did he pick up nations and move them, but he mixed everyone up. Right? This is really how the lost 10 tribes got lost. Okay, 2.5 of them already gone earlier, but what happened is that they got removed from Israel, and not only they got put in other places, but they got mixed up with all the other people. So they didn't even have independent communities. So he put these people in a region of Israel, Shomron, in the Samaria, which is part of the Jewish homeland, and he put them there. And they were attacked by lions. Well, there used to be quite a few lions in Israel. They were attacked by lions, and they believed that the reason that they were attacked was because they were living in the land of Israel and they weren't worshipping the God of the land of Israel. They were still doing the idols. So out of their fear of being attacked by lions, they converted to Judaism. And although having ulterior motives is problematic, but after the fact, if someone was sincere, in other words, they took everything on sincerely and they kept it, even if the motives weren't so pure, then that's after the fact works. But what we saw with these people is that after the fact, they were actually still doing different aspects of idol worship. Now, it took a long time to realize that. And at a certain period, so we're going to see in the Mishnah, they were sort of looked at as Jews had gone off. But by the time of the Gemara, they already looked totally as non-Jews. So it was similar to that example I gave about revoking that person's conversion. It wasn't that we later said their conversion is no good. What we saw in hindsight was that they were never for real in the first place. And that's why they were considered non-Jews in the end. Now, we said the conversion was actually no good initially. All right, so you said Ed, more than one question. That was, that's not, that's good, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that's them. Next clause in the Mishnah. So you see the following. Al hazikin. You see zikin. Now zikin are things like comets, shooting stars, various things, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in a moment. Balas voice or earthquakes, Bala Romim or thunder, Bala Ruchos and winds. And again, we'll define what calls a wind because there's pretty much wind all the time. Bala Brochim or on lightning, any of these things, a person says, Baruch Shekoichai Gebarasa Mother Oilam. So again, bless you, Hashem, King of the universe, whose strength and might fill the world. All right. So, first of all, zikin, right? These comets and different things. So, we're gonna in Rashi and the Gemara, we use the expression of like a star with a tail or various things. So, I just want to point out that the word koichov means star. Koichov means stars. Or at least that's how we normally translate it in English. In biblical Hebrew, it really means anything that's in the sky, essentially. So not the sun and the moon, but everything else is a koichov. So it's just convenience, right? English and Hebrew don't match up. Again, just to give an example of how English and Hebrew don't match up. You know, when it comes to our brochos, right? We've been learning about brochos on food. So Brei Priya eights that we say on things that grow from a tree, and Brei Priya Hadamos, things that grow from the ground. Now, normally we translate them as fruit and vegetables, but it doesn't match up, right? It doesn't match up. If we do an exact translation, they're both peri, which we often translate as fruit, but in this context means produce. So it's the produce of a tree or the produce of the ground, right? And if we use the technical English term, you know, anything with a flower is a fruit. So even half of what we generally call vegetables are actually fruit. So it's not the English definition of fruit and vegetables that make the difference. It's pre-8, something that it's sustenance of the produce primarily comes from a tree that from the same stem there's going to be fruit again, or the same branch, different things. And a Brei Priya Adama is something that it, when it goes from the ground, that even if there's some type of bush or like a banana tree, but it dies away. It's not the same. It's not the same a branch. Now another example, we speak about kosher fish and non-kosher fish. So we would say, for example, a dog meaning a fish. So it doesn't mean the English word fish. A dog means a creature that its primary habitat is the ocean. So even certain amphibians, you know, do we look at them as a land creature or a water creature? So it depends. You know, give an example in the Talmud. If it feels threatened, where does it run to? Does it run to the land or run to the water? Now, that's not always a good test, because if the threat's on the land, so they might just run to the water. That gets away from the threat, not because that's where they feel the most safe. You know, if the threat happened to be on, you know, was a shark after them, so they quickly run onto the land, that gets away from the shark. But in concept, if it could go either way, if it goes to the water, we see that's its primary habitat. You know, there's other ways also, but that's an example. So wherever its primary habitat, so if its primary habitat is the water, even if it's amphibian or a mammal like a dolphin, then it's a dog. So it doesn't mean fish like we say in English. You know, people often they use as an excuse to laugh at Judaism, you know, because they don't understand how it works. You know, they say, you know, you say a dolphin's not a kosher fish. It's not even a fish. See how primitive you are? No.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So it's got snapper, kesketsid. It's a fish, a kosher fish. It's got scales and fins,
Yes.
but some people mistake a dolphin as like a fish because its tail it's got fins on its tails, but they're parallel. I mean, they're horizontal instead of vertical. The vertical makes it between a mammal and a non-mammal within the ocean.
Yeah. So I'm saying that, but although we normally translate dog as fish, it's not exact translation. The biblical Hebrew word dog means a creature whose primary habitat is the water. So therefore, dolphin fits into that category, even if it's a mammal. And so do certain frogs, even though they're amphibians. Certain frogs' primary habitat is the land. You have different types. So Kaichov, which is normally translated as star, particularly in modern Hebrew, it doesn't mean that. In biblical Hebrew, Kaichov means essentially whatever's in space. They're all Kaichavim. So comets, planets, stars, essentially everything except the sun and the moon. Because probably a better translation, that's probably is a good translation, anything that's in space. That's not an artificial satellite, anything that's natural in space. So these zikin, a type of star, or kaichov, is not a star, obviously, with a tail and various things. So it's like a comets, asteroids, these types of things. Okay, so I think earthquakes, we understand, that's you see Hashem's, how the power of nature, Hashem that created. Thunder, we've all had that moment where we're sitting comfortably on the couch or something, and there was this mighty, peal of thunder, like sort of shocked you. But winds, what's the definition of wind? Anyone got a suggestion?
The rapid movement of air.
Okay, all right, that's a good definition. But by winds, we mean things like hurricanes and tornadoes, right? An incredibly strong wind, an extraordinary wind, not
cyclonic movement.
That's right. So not just a windy day, you got to hold on to your hat. We're talking about out of the usual, very powerful winds. So those who live in Florida probably get to make this broch every now and then. Hopefully not too often. Okay. The next clause. So al hahorim, on mountains, and again we'll talk about a definition shortly. Al gvois, on the hills, and again we'll define. A hill doesn't mean every little, a slope in the land. We'll give a description. Al yomim, on the oceans, on the haros and rivers, and again we're going to give definitions. Al midbaros, on the wildernesses, deserts. When a person says, Baruch Oisei Bereshis. Right? So blessed is Hashem who makes the works of creation. Okay, so the first thing we have to point out over here is that it has to be something that was there from the time of creation. Right? If you have a man-made river, it doesn't count. Rabbi Huda says, Harayas Hayam Gadol, someone who sees the great sea, the great ocean. Again, we'll define this in a moment. He says, Baruch Sha'asa Es Hayam Gadol. Blessed is Hashem, blessed is Hashem, who made the great sea. Now, there's also a question: is he arguing with the previous statement, because we include rivers, or is he clarifying? But we'll get to that in a moment. And when do we say there's blessings? There's blessings. There's manshurei u'lefrokim. Only when you see it from time to time. Okay, and we'll define that in a moment as well. Okay. So, first thing we said is it has to be something from the time of creation. Now, any ideas on how we, if you live in Israel, pretty much everywhere you go, there's a mountain. Right. So what's the definition of mountains? Any suggestions or thoughts? How would you define a mountain to make a blessing on?
Something that's hard to climb.
It's really hard to climb. Okay. So what we're going to say is that it's something that creates a feeling of awe in you. So, for example, the commentators on the Gemara, the example of Har Ararat, Mount Ararat, where Noah's ark fell. It's much taller than all the other mountains in the area. So even though in Israel it's a very mountainous area, people probably aren't so excited about seeing mountains. You see them everywhere. But this mountain is so much bigger than all the others. It's like, whoa, that's impresses you with Hashem's creation. The same, we're talking about hills. Again, it's something. It's not just every hill, every incline in the sidewalk. It's something that you look at it, it's like, whoa, like it blows you away. There are just certain. I'm sure everyone's had a moment where there's just seen something so majestic in nature. It's like it's awe-inspiring, and you can't help but be so excited about the creator of all these things. Yes, Robert.
Wouldn't there be a form of Shechianu?
Not necessarily. In that we're going to speak about Shechianu in this mission. Also, we're going to get to it. So Shechianu is you have to have some benefit from it. I don't want to preempt what's coming up, but when you speak about, let's say, for example, let's talk about when you make a Shechianu on a Yontif, it's not only the miracle that we survived, to this Yontif, but we get the benefit. There's something special, and even the fact that we live this benefit. So if you see a incredible aspect of nature, I mean, there's a benefit that you enjoy it, but you don't actually benefit directly from seeing it. So it's that's why it's this broch is like, wow, look, Hashem, look what Hashem created essentially. This is just awesome. And if that's the creation, who can imagine even the creator? That's the idea of this blessing. It's a praise as opposed to a thanks for the benefit we received. So that's that. We're going to skip ocean a minute because that's a bigger discussion. So the rivers, again, has to be a river that's from the time of creation. So for example, the rivers mentioned in the beginning of Brochos came out of Gan Eden. But as we said, a man-made river doesn't help. So, there's a whole discussion. What if a river changes course? Over the years, many rivers have changed course, and including these 4 rivers. So, can we make a blessing on it? What if there's a new section? People make canals and various things. So the new sections, we don't make a blessing. The course that's changed again is because it's a matter of dispute. Essentially, we're going to not make the blessing, not because we decided not to, but because of the concept of Safek Brochos Lahakel. Whenever we have a doubt about a blessing, we don't want to say Hashem's name for nothing. So we're not going to say it. It comes to the Yam HaGadol, the Great Sea. So anyone know which ocean is the Great Sea? Or a suggestion?
The Oceanus is a great sea.
Mediterranean.
Right. So generally we say the Yam HaGadol, we mean the Great Sea, but you're both right because you both just quoted 2 different opinions. So generally speaking, we mean the Great Sea is the Mediterranean. Why? 2 reasons. Number one, well, the primary reason, because that's the sea you cross to go to Eretz Yisrael. That's what makes it superior to to other oceans.
And you see it from Israel.
Right, and that's the other factor, that is the one that you see. So it works in both directions. But there's a whole discussion here. Does it mean specifically the Mediterranean, or does it mean every ocean? So then we have another point. Even the ones who say it's a Mediterranean, perhaps it's still the ocean, every ocean, because they all join up. You know, and in other words, it's excluding something like the Dead Sea. Right? It's excluding something like the Dead Sea, which is landlocked, so it doesn't join up. So we're going to have various views on this, on what we do.
The Kinneret is another one.
Right, being landlocked, yeah. So that's okay. So the question is going to be, so those who are in Israel, it's quite straightforward. But let's say California, right? In Arizona, you don't see the ocean too often. Although we say technically the beach starts here. You just keep driving along the sand for 6 hours, and right, the desert sand, and you get to the ocean. So technically it's the beach already, but the ocean isn't there. So in general, we're going to conclude that it's the whole body of ocean. So even on the Pacific Ocean, we're still going to make the same blessing. And we say prokim from time to time. When you see these things, we mean 30 days. And 30 days is the, you know, if you see something every day, you know, someone who's next door to Mount Everest, they're not going to be very inspired. You know, it's just the daily, ordinary thing. But when you don't see something for 30 days, it's incredible. Now, growing up in Australia, essentially, where people live, majority of people, and definitely where the Jewish communities are, it's all on the coast. So I don't think it's such a thing as not seeing the ocean for 30 days. Probably, you know, those who live in Florida, it's pretty similar. If you're not right, you know, if you're not a beachfront, but you drive around different places, you're going to see the ocean every 30 days. So,
Rabbi,
yes.
I want to say in Arizona, you don't need to see an ocean. You have a mirage most of the time from the heat. Imagine that's the ocean. You can at least imagine it.
That's it. So, so I'm not going to say I never made a broch on the ocean in my whole life before I moved. I probably did it. Right then, after being in Arizona for however long, we drove to California for a family simcha. And there's the Pacific, and I haven't seen it in you know, months. It's sure more than 30 days. And some of my younger kids didn't even remember what the ocean looked like. So I went there to make the bracha, and then I wasn't sure what the bracha was, because whoever said it, you know, we had to go look it up. You know, that was that's what happened. So in other words, if you see it every day, it's not inspiring. You see the ocean every day, you know, doesn't make any difference. But more than 30 days, that's when it inspires you. Okay. All right. Next clause. Al Geshomim, on rain. Val Besoros Toivos Oime, and on other good news, you say the bracha Baruch HaToiva Meitiv. Right? So Baruch Hashem came Macholam, HaToiva Meitiv, which Hashem, who is good and does good. So let's just discuss this for a moment. There's, in this respect, for the rain, we say a tova meitiv, we actually, it has to be a situation where other people benefited as well. So give an example. Let's say it rained on my field and no one else's field. Right, so my field needs rain because I need my crops to grow. But you know, today we don't really appreciate the rain because normally when it rains, we all complain. But of course, not so long ago, everyone was pretty much a farmer, or even if they were the blacksmith, you know, they're dependent on agriculture. Of course, really today we're also dependent on agriculture. We just don't realize it. Right? I think I've mentioned this once before. I was shocked. It's probably a year or two ago now, but in Arizona, there was a protest and by students for the environmental protest, and one of the speakers who was a graduate student university, right, doing her master's, she gets up and she says, we can close all farms because today we have supermarkets where we get our food from. We don't need farms. Right? He said it, it's
She can create it.
yeah. So the problem is she's probably going to be a senator in a few years. I'm voting on these things. That's the scary part. I one time a student for an end of year gift in elementary school gave me this mug that says, your students today are going to be the world leaders of the future. And the particular person that gave it to me was a scary thought. But some students I'm looking forward, but that was ironic that it was that particular student. But anyway, that's a separate issue. That's but we all need rain, right? We need the agriculture. We need to survive. But if it's only my field that it rains on, then I don't say the blessing because no one else benefits. Once it goes on at least one other person's field and everyone benefits, then we can say the bracha, or even my field if I own it in partnership. Right? That's also considered another person benefiting. Okay. All right, so that's that blessing. Then we have the reverse. The Soros Rois Omer, on bad news, we say, Baruch Dain HaEmes. Blessed is the true judge. Now, again, just to define bad news, we actually have to have lost something as opposed to not gained. So, bad news, we're talking about, let's say, a business deal didn't work out where, you didn't lose, but you just didn't make the gain. You're hoping to make this huge profit. And unfortunately, it's panned out. All you got is what you invested. Then although that's bad news, because you are looking forward to hearing this wonderful news, but that's not the type of thing we make a bracha on. It actually has to be a tangible loss. And of course, the epitome, the most extreme case of this blessing is when someone loses, God forbid, a relative they have to sit shiva for. Right? So when they tear kriya, they tear the clothes that they as a sign of mourning. Presuming they were in town and they heard about it in time. So normally at the funeral, so they make this bracha when they tear the kriya. This is a real tangible loss, and the greatest type of loss. Money can be replaced. Loss of a person, unfortunately, can't be. So that's okay. Questions or comments? All right. Next clause. The kona kalim chadashim. A person buys new kalim. So again, in modern Hebrew, kalim normally means utensils, like pots and pans. But kalim in biblical rabbinic Hebrew is non-real estate, essentially. So, I mean, not animals either, but, so it's clothes, furniture, various things. So it has to have some significance. We'll discuss what's the definition of significance. But if a person purchases something significant, he says, Baruch, right? He's kept us alive, he sustained us, and he brought us to this point. So, what's significant enough to make it? So, sorry, I skipped some word. I skipped Bonda Bayis Chodosh. If he builds a new house, or he acquires these new kelim. So, if he buys a house, it's not only building a house. Even if he buys a house, that's significant. But that's if he buys a house.
Considered kelim?
So kelim means, in this context, clothes, furniture.
Anything new that you buy?
Yeah, well, it has to be significant. We'll discuss in a minute what's the definition of significant. Okay, and to a large extent, it's changed. Just to give without preempting discussion, but once upon a time, people had one set of weekday clothes, one set of Shabbos clothes, and if you got a new pair of pants with the equivalent, people probably wore a tunic or something, but you got a new pair of pants once every 2-3 years, that was like a big thing. Today people own several pairs of pants, and buying a new pair of pants is no big deal.
Well, first it was Shabbos, and then when you got a few holes and patches, it became weekday.
That's right. That's how it went. And then you got perhaps a new pair of Shabbos pants. So significance can change. We'll discuss in a moment. But speaking about the house. So what if a person built or bought a house in partnership? It's now partnership would not mean investment. We mean people used to live in 1 or 2 rooms, but they bought the house. So they're actually not going to say the bracha shechianu. They're going to say the bracha tova meitiv. That's only if a person builds or buys a house himself. Now, when do they make the bracha? When do you think you make the bracha in a house?
When you move in.
Think when you move in?
Yeah.
Okay, it's actually going to be at the completion of the house or the purchase. You're right for everything else. Everything else, we're going to say you make a shechianu when you actually use it. So, for example, again, when you would make a bracha on pants, that's a separate issue. But if you did, let's say you bought it, but it needs some alterations. So you wouldn't make the bracha until after the alterations, so you can actually wear it, you can use it. But the house is different. Because when does a person feel the happiness of the house? When it's his. So a person buys the house, they feel the happiness, even though they didn't move in yet. Oh, I bought the house. And the same is going to be the completion. In other words, when it's there, they hand over the keys, the builder hands over the keys or whatever it is. Here's your house, it's built.
We do, as lawyers, from lawyers, we should do a shechianu at the closing.
Well, the owner. It's not the.
Oh, not the Misharsim, right?
Yeah.
Let's call the owner and say, say l'chaim.
Yep. That's right. So it's when it's when you take possession. Okay, but for everything else, let's say clothes or furniture, it's when you can use it. Now the question is, what's the definition of significance? So, or what do you say shechianu on? So Tosfos, he explains it's something significant, doesn't really give a definition per se, but I guess something significant for society, right? So it's not just a new shirt; it's a $500, $1,000 suit. Yes, Robert.
The question being then, So you finally purchase a house, that's one blessing. And then as you move in and you fix the mezuzot, that is an additional blessing, or it's
Right.
just,
So that's not a blessing on taking possession of the house, but that's a blessing on doing Hashem's mitzvah. That now we can put a mezuzah on the house.
okay,
Right. But of course, every blessing in the house, and particularly on something that encompasses the entire house, like the mezuzah, brings actually blessings and positive spiritual energy into the house. Okay. The Rosh says that significance is not something that's significant in society. The Rosh says it's something that it depends on the buyer. So, you might have one person, due to his financial or whatever situation, even though he's worn this talus every single day for 20 years, and it's got patches and it's colored with sweat. I don't mean to be gross or anything, but it's finally he gets a new talus. For him, that's like, wow, it says Shechianu. Then this other guy every year buys a new talus, and he's got 20 of them in his closet, and they all look pretty good. And so no, it depends on the buyer. Some people own $21,000 suits, and some person would never dream of it. If you get something that's like so the Rosh says it's dependent on the buyer. Significance is not significant in society, like Tosfos seems to imply, but significant for that individual. Yes, Robert.
let's say, again, clean. I take my talit to a dry cleaner because after use, I make a bracha because it's been cleansed or it's given new life, or what's the protocol for
it's
that?
only if it's a new one that you didn't have.
Okay.
It's only a new one didn't have. But the fellow, he took his towels to the dry cleaner. He got a $1,000 bill, and it says $1,000. He says, yeah, it was $20 for dry cleaning. The rest was untying all those knots.
Well, I took my talit and they billed it as a scarf, so that's what it was called.
Yeah, so let's so cleaning something up or restoring, let's say like the furniture can also be restoring furniture. It's when it's new, unless when I say restoring furniture, if it wasn't already your furniture, right? So if you had your chairs and you got them restored, you don't say a shechianu, but it could be you bought some antique chairs and you got them restored and now you bring them to the house and use them. That's a separate situation. But so the Rosh says dependent on the buyer. That's what we'll do. So, and the Radbaz, he comments, therefore a rich person does not say shechianu on pretty much anything, because it is lived a few hundred years ago. The rich person, his time, in other words, you can get whatever you want, clothes, furniture, you have plenty. You don't get excited. No one gets, so even when you buy a new suit, okay, big deal. People don't get so excited about it. Now, based on that, that's pretty much the halacha today, in that, even people aren't doing so well compared to those times who are rich. Even someone today in a very limited income who lives in a small apartment. Now, let's even say 1 bedroom studio, which is, first of all, that was considered a regular house in those days. With 1 bedroom apartment, the equivalent size today probably had 2 families living in it in biblical times. So, but if we have running water, sewage, electricity, with a few basic appliances like an oven, washing machine for our clothes, we live today like people lived with 100 servants. We don't have to tap water from the well. We can a vacuum cleaner. A few basic appliances. We live today like the richest people. So generally speaking, we don't make shechianu anything. You know, if we speak about a talus, there are certain communities that make a shechianu on the first time they wear a talus or tefillin. The tefillin is the shechianu the first time doing the mitzvah, but a talus, you know, they're wearing sitz is not necessarily a is there a mitzvah? I mean, it's good to have this special talus for davening, but a person did the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis till now, of having a four-corner garment. So this is really because it's wow, it's my first talus. You know, something that's special. We like once in a lifetime. People sometimes, certain communities that make a bracha, but other than that, pretty much today, not really on clothes, not really on furniture. Yes, Robert.
This may be a little odd question or diversion from what we're saying. It's like, I have my original talit from after I got bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
It's getting old and it's wool. And unfortunately, there are, again, holes in it, let's say. What does one do in retiring a talit? You don't send it to a keniza, but it does have, I don't know what the name of the affixed cloth is, right, that has, right, the blessing.
Yeah.
What do you do with a Torah that cannot, a talus that cannot be used any longer? Is it just? Go ahead.
So there's a few things. First of all, the strings do go in the genizah, do go in the shemus. So you pull off the strings. Now, when it has it,
Well, you
the
just
blessing,
cut off the corners. It's easier
you
to
can
just
cut
cut
off the corners,
the
or
cloth.
you can just break the strings. One or the other, and they go in the
Shemus.
shemus and the genizah. The strip, if it has, normally when they put the blessing, they don't actually write Hashem's name. Right? It says Baruch Aton, it's got like a hay with a dash. You don't say Hashem. So if it says like that, then it's not a problem. But really has Hashem's name, then that's also going to have to go into the shemus. Now, the actual beged, the garment itself, since it was used for a mitzvah, we don't just throw it in the garbage. So you double wrap it. So, you know, this maybe in 2 shopping bags, let's say, for example. So it's disposed of, you know, you can dispose of it, but it should be disposed of respectfully. So that's why we double wrap it rather than just put it in the garbage, you know, with a mushed up banana and eggshells and, you know, tuna can.
Can it be buried?
Well, the strings that go on the genizah end up getting buried.
Right, okay.
But the garment doesn't have to be buried.
Itself.
Now,
Okay.
a person, you know, we shouldn't, you know, we should all live long and healthy for many years. But God forbid, when the time comes, a person is buried in the talus.
Right.
The man is buried in the talus. They take the strings off, but they're buried in the talus. And, you know, today, most of us own or have owned in our lifetime many telasim, or, you know, several. And sometimes one's original talus has a bit of sentimental value. You know, either from the mitzvah or those who put on talus by the weddings when their wife gave them. You know, sometimes people, even when it's worn out, they hold on to it for, you know, I'm not saying people should carry around the bag with their shrouds, you know, in preparation, God forbid. But, you know, my original talus my wife bought me is long retired. But even though I'm planning, you know, it's up to Hashem, of course, but my plan is we should live for many, many more years. I'll let the kids, thank you. I'll let the kids know that's the talus that I, you know, would like to use at that time.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I know on pizza, you know, a lot of people, they wear a kittel, you know, and I've heard white, you know, and I assume that's what most people would prefer to be, you know, when their time comes, that they would prefer to be buried, you know.
No,
Yeah, well, a person's buried in shrouds, but most kitlach today are cotton or polyester, and they get buried in linen normally. So the kid and
the
also
Hebrew Kadisha will not let you give them things, you know, to dress anyone in. They use their takrichim and.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and the other point is that a lot of kitlach today are very fancy, which sort of defeats part of the purpose. You know,
Yeah.
So, the comment that was made about the Chevra Kadisha not letting you use it, I guess that's a policy of the local Chevra Kadisha. If a person did have linen, plain kittos, what they used, there could be some places will let them use that. Well, we've gone a little overboard over time.
Yeah.
So to be continued tomorrow, God willing.
Thank you,
And,
Rabbi.
Thank you,
We'll see you
Rabbi.
this afternoon, Rabbi.
not this afternoon,
Rabbi Steinmetz.
Wednesday
Oh, good.
afternoon. So tomorrow we're
thank
on
you.
twice.
Thank
All
you.
right, great, thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Have an
Rabbi.
amazing
Thank
day.
you, Rebbe.
Bye, Rabbi.